I consider it my great good fortune that I was able to have the opportunity to serve the process of his creation of his books, which was a very large and very detailed process. And he had a very specific intention, not only to write everything he wanted to communicate, but to actually write it in his own handwriting. So there could never be any doubt that he was the one who wrote the words in the books. You could say, in a way, that he spent decades developing his own form of English. I think that's fair to say that he was doing that in the writing of his books. And he made use of all the features of written language and brought them to a very fine point of development, including such matters as capitalization, use of quotation marks, those two in particular. He spent a lot of consideration developing so that it would maximally communicate what he wanted to communicate. And one of his great principles is that reality is fundamentally divine. And he distinguishes between non-conditional reality, which is the divine reality, and conditional reality, which is all the things that happen for a certain amount of time and then they pass away, like a human life, for example, is an example of something in conditional reality. And he says there are these two dimensions, but even so, the conditional reality is always arising within the divine reality. And so he made great use of capitalization to point up the interplay between the divine reality and the conditional reality. And that's why you will see so many capitalized words in his writings, because he wants to bring that to the fore, that matter of the interplay of the conditional reality with the divine reality which it arises within. As we all know, when we read a book, we can often be very inspired by what the author is communicating and learn great lessons from something in a book. And naturally, Adida's books have the same function. They're very inspirational. They're very instructive. They have many, many lessons for us to absorb and learn from. But there is more to his books than these wonderful qualities. And the most significant quality of his writing is that it is a form of transmission. And so his very being is communicated through the words. And he was very intentional about this. He acknowledged that his lifetime would be limited like any human being's lifetime, but he intentionally created ways for people to connect with him spiritually after his life as well as during his life. And his books are one of those primary ways of connecting to him spiritually. He referred to those things as his agents. And so he said his books are his agents, and they transmit his feeling of love, his feeling of bliss, his feeling of no problem, his feeling of there is no need to seek. His books transmit his quality of being, which is a quality of infinite love and no question about the divine nature of reality, his quality of no need to seek for something because the divine is already the case. I'm sure many of you have read some of the spiritual literature of the world, of Christianity or Buddhism, of Hinduism, of many different traditions. And those kind of books have a unique purpose to draw us into knowing the nature of reality, which some traditions refer to as God, or other traditions may have other ways of referring to them as Buddha or Nirvana or the one being, the one self, and so forth. And to understand, to actually deeply understand the nature of reality and to be instructed in a practice that deepens that understanding of reality is the great function of spiritual literature. And of course, this is exactly what Avatar Adidar Samraj intended to do with his books.
What happens in my mind a little bit to those 3D holographic posters that were popular years back, and they told you, first you can't, it just looks like noise, and they say soften your focus or soften your point of view. And I don't even know what, you relax something, I don't even know what it is, and all of a sudden this whole other picture pops out. And there's something that occurs when I'm reading your source word, your heart word. It's a little bit, something adjusts in me, I can tell. It's nothing altogether that, I mean, I kind of relax that I need that subject, and I stop racing back to find the subject, as I lose it in the sentence or whatever, and I just start taking in a whole different way.
Well, you're coming into coincidence with me through these words. So, to study or consider my word is to commune with me.
Mm-hmm.
And the more profoundly you participate in that for real and forget yourself, the more experience you'll have of being entered into communion with me to the point of being aware, in some fundamental sense aware, of my state. And so to approach me through my word is a form of devotional communion with me. And my written and spoken word is a unique and actual means for that to occur. It's not in the same sense that any words might do that, or even any traditional text of some esoteric kind, but because of the uniqueness of the word, of my utterance. It literally does manifest me, and one who enters into it literally can be brought into communion with me. Just as you may by my murti or any of
Right.
the agencies of mind that are explicitly extended as such, as agents of mind. It all has the force of murti, or of my body here, and has a unique characteristic, not necessarily altogether comprehensible from any kind of figuring it out point of view or perspective, but like that kind of picture you described, which I've seen, you look at it for a while, when you let yourself go in it, you see these three-dimensional forms, flat planes of whatever the picture is, fish in the ocean or whatever. It looks like several flat paper-cut forms, one behind the other, in a three-dimensional space. And then when you try to focus the eyes in the way you require to perceive in the room in the normal fashion, you lose the image. It becomes just this all-over chaotic, or this all-over pattern that doesn't differentiate itself into this apparent three-dimensional space. So it is with my word. If you turn to me through it, then you can actually be entered into a profound state of communion with me through it. But not by getting confused or puzzled and so forth. And straining over the language and developing some problematic analytical thinking process. Not that there aren't things to figure out and different ways you can make use of my teaching in any instance, but there's a fundamental approach to me through my word that is really the same as meditation on me or devotional communion with me. And the words bring you into that domain of mine, much as if you relax into a certain way of perceiving, you can see the three-dimensional picture in those computer-generated images you've described. And when you let yourself, or when you spontaneously are entered into this turning to me, turning over to me, this surrendered disposition, then you tacitly do experience something of my state fundamentally. Just as if you concentrated on anyone, you might somehow or other get to feel something about their state. So when you give me your regard, turn the faculties to me, and do so through any medium, a murti form of mine, or my sitting here now, or my words, or images I've made, whatever. Anything has the force of agency, places I've established, and so on. Fully established in the spiritual sense. Anything I've given as agency of mine. If you are turned to me by the means of whatever that particular mode of agency is, you can, rightly and fully participating in that, become aware of me in a profound manner. And that will show you my nature and state directly. It is how I show myself directly, by all kinds of means I make and establish here, in which I'm establishing in perpetuity. Means that are living means that will be associated with me as I am forever.
In 2006, Avatar Adida began to work on a new text that would become the Aletheon. And for the years before that, he had created several books that commented on the traditions of religion and spirituality and contrasted them with his unique way that he had revealed. But this book now, he said, was going to be what he wanted to say, was going to be pure him, pure communication of what he brings, of the bright, of reality. In some sense, he felt that now he could create the book that would fulfill the impulse he'd had after the great event of 1986 to be utterly free of the need to submit to devotees or the world, just to be as he is. And this book could be a direct communication of that. Once he said, the Aletheon is me. And many ways, that was what he had to say, was to show himself. Immediately after Adida passed, those of us who serve his written word were certain that the first thing that needed to occur was to publish the Aletheon. He had put his seal on it in the morning of the day he passed. He had devoted so much of his time and intention and poured so much of himself into that book in the last years of his life that that book needed to be present in the world as soon as possible. So we immediately began the process of bringing it to publication. And the book at the end is 2,300 pages, so it was completely out of the box of any single book we'd published before, and every step of the production was exaggeratedly intensive. So I was able to be a proofreader for that process and began reading and had been reading for many, many weeks. When you read Adida's books, it's not like reading for the reasons that we read otherwise. It's not entertainment. It's not for the accumulation of some kind of factual information or knowledge that you get from the book. It's actually a dimension. It's a universe. It's a process that you step into when you open those pages. And particularly if you're reading cover to cover, you don't know where that process is going to lead you. And in any moment in that process, you can't necessarily judge, is it working or not? You're in a process, and you have to trust that it's going to reveal itself. So I was in that process with the Aletheon in the proofreading, and thousands of pages deep into it. And this one particular night, very towards the end of the proofreading process, I had my little proofreading table out, and I was reading one of the final major essays in the book where Avatar Adida really says who he is. He really confesses the direct nature of his bright revelation. And as I was reading the words, suddenly it was as if the room had been transported to another climate or another dimension. The air thickened and filled with Adida's presence. Not visually, I couldn't see him. It wasn't like I was having a vision of him. He was floating in. It was pervading everything. I was not separate from it. It was him. It was his presence. And it was clear to me that that was the import of the process of this book. To find him, to know him, so to speak, to receive the knowledge of reality through his words. It wasn't philosophy. It was his communication of himself. As he'd said, the Aletheon is me. That's what the Aletheon communicates, is him.